Welcome to Simply Sarah. I am your host, Sarah Stockham, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting us into your space. And whether you are watching as a television show or you're choosing to listen as a podcast, we value you. And we always have conversations with people that we believe are going to impact your life in a positive, good way. And today we have somebody that we will be doing that with as well. But before we bring them in, I want to say, to our sponsor, Glass Arts Collective, thank you so much for your continued support. We are just so grateful for how you are seeing people as being creative beings and that you are celebrating that in what you are doing. Today in studio, we have Larry Lempka of Los Rios Farms in Colorado, and we are just delighted that you are here to share your journey from being in high school and having that first crop of peas that you had all the way to what you are doing now with regenerative farming. Larry, welcome.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it, Sarah.
So glad that you are here. Tell me a little bit about what piqued your interest that you would want to go into farming.
Oh my. Well, it's a heritage thing. It's one of those callings that you get that you don't have any explanation for. It just more or less happens. And as time goes on, I've discovered, I guess, why that's all happened. There's been some serendipitous moments in my life that have demonstrated that, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do. I just haven't exactly found the niche that's been ultra pleasing for me, but I think we're starting to get there. I think I've finally found the avenue that we want to take, and I'm excited about going forward with that.
Absolutely. So you did literally decades of what we call traditional farming in terms of using the chemicals on the ground, and I understand this. My mom's acreage is still being farmed that way as well. And I love the space that you've come into with regenerative farming. What are you seeing as being the important pieces for people to understand the difference between how you used to do things and how you are doing them now?
Well, that's one of the things that I like to give a lot of my presentations on is kind of the history of agriculture and where we started and how we got to where we are. And I like to bring it in and start it with Jethro Tull, not the musician, but actually the farmer, gentleman back in the 1700s in the UK. He was frustrated with workers and he couldn't get them to plant his crops at the right depth, the right distance. And so he created a grain drill, and we fashioned it to the point where we still use that type of machine yet today. And so that's where we started with the mechanization. And then we started learning at that point in time what chemicals were in the ground, in our air, in our soil. And as time went on, we kept trying to, and back in those days, they were having to deal with a lot of manure, a lot of dung. Right. And so they were trying to figure out how that was affecting the soil. And then, they discovered nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, that kind of thing. And then they started getting into the micronutrients. It was a German professor later on in the later 17th century, I guess the 18th century, that he became more of a chemist. And so he created, Dr. Liebig was his name. And so he created what they called Liebig's manure. And that was the start of chemical fertilizer. And so what has happened is agriculture has just taken technology, and what we thought we were improving, we were actually getting further and further and further away from nature. And so the big thing that really affected the United States was the great land rush. Back in the 1850s and 60s, we had all these immigrants, typically European immigrants, that moved into the central United States. And the first tool they used was a plow.
Right.
And so what they did was they destroyed the almost pristine prairie by plowing that up and taking all that soil biome and putting that up on top of the soil and killing it. And then, as we saw in the 1930s, we had the Great Dust Bowl when we had the drought. And so our technology, and we've had big companies that come in, and the Monsantos of the world, the Bayers, our big fertilizer companies, of course, the seed companies. It's all been, we need to get higher production. We need to push the soil harder and harder. And then they found that, we need to start adding all these other chemicals in order to get that production that we felt was needed. And consequently, what we've done is we've just ruined the soils. There's some demonstrations around, some pictures that I've seen where I think one was in eastern Washington, where the soils eroded almost 20 feet just because of conventional farming. And with that, having to add all these chemicals, we've lost our food value. Our food just doesn't have the nutrient level that it used to. And so by trying to add all these things, and now people are doing the same thing, with their diets. Everybody is, you got to have a probiotic, your gut's not right. It all starts with soil. We ruined with the soil, and now we're having to come with all these different ideas and additives to try and improve things. And so that's what brought me back to, wait a minute, whoa, what's going on here? And started going back to the soil science. And basically what we found is we need to start adding bacteria and fungus and small micronutrients. And if the plants become healthy, the soil is healthy, and that communication's going on, then we start putting the carbon back in the ground.
Right.
And so when we start getting that carbon cycle back and operating correctly, then everything starts balancing out, and you start seeing some fantastic results with it, and you feel better. I mean, I just feel better walking into my field. Yeah, there's weeds. It's not a pristine field, but on the other side of it, where I'm feeding cattle, those cows, they need those weeds, and they help monitor those kinds of things. And so, the biggest thing that I'm having to learn with this process is, how do we deal with the drought? How do we go about doing this with no moisture? And that's been my biggest challenge. If I lived in an environment like Hawaii, where we'd get 200 inches of rain a year, it would obviously be a lot simpler. But being in a very arid desert type region, it's been a bit of a challenge. But I'm excited about what we're learning and trying to move forward with it.
What was the piece that for you made you say, I've been doing conventional, I am now ready to try this next step, try something different? There's usually a piece that happens that is a difficult chapter in order for someone to say, oh, I've been doing it this way, I'm going to change and make a radical change to try something different.
Well, I need to go back just a little bit in time, about 20 some years ago, that we had a severe drought here, and I was farming a lot of acres by myself, all irrigated, and we'd had a really, really rough year. The drought was like 3 years in a row, and I just like, wait a minute, we can't keep doing this. Something's got to give. And at that point in time, my father started having some health issues, and he was getting old, and I was having to start dealing with him. And so the neighbors stepped in and said, hey, I'd like to try and farm your farm if you kind of help me with the irrigation. And so I was able to stay in touch, but yet step away. And through that course of time, we had a pretty severe flood that came through here. And I spent a lot of time dealing with the reparations of the river that we live on, and trying to get that all in place. And I started seeing some things occurring that I couldn't explain. We were hiring all these consultants and engineers, and they were trying to put these thowwags in the river and all this other stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm seeing the river do that on its own. And I went to a conference, I guess it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And they were talking about regenerative ag, and how this guy, he was kind of forced into it because the bank cut him off. and he wasn't able to get financing. And so he's like, how do I go about farming by self-funding?
Right.
And by the elimination of all the chemical and all, the other inputs, fertilizers and so forth, he started seeing some things that enlightened him and started coming around. And I'm like, wait a minute. And on the way home from that conference, it was springtime, and all the, we had a lot of German and Russian intern camps here during World War II, and a lot of these farmers that are here are of that heritage, and they were getting ready to plant their sugar beets, and they were beating the ground to just death. I mean, it was just, the ground looked beautiful, but from what I had just sat through for 2 days listening to what we were doing wrong, they were doing exactly what was wrong. And so that light bulb came on, that epiphany hit me right there. And I'm like, we've got to change. This isn't right. And so at that point in time, within just a month or two, that farmer that had been farming my place, he came to me and he says, development has moved in on me. He says, my main farm has been sold. He says, I'm leaving. You've got your farm back. And I'm like, oh dear, now what do we do? And so that was the entryway to start putting these practices in place, start doing what we needed to do. And it's been a pretty steep learning curve, but this last year, when I've started learning about putting the compost tea extracts on by putting the biology right back into the soil, it's given me a whole new spark and a lot more. We haven't tested anything to know that it's the actual right thing to be doing. We don't have proven results, but I see the results. I see things being different. And so I've gotten to the point where we need to study this a lot more. We need to try and figure out what really happened when I started putting that tea on. And it's brought a level of excitement to me now that I've not had with farming for quite a long time. And a lot of farmers feel the same way. I mean, I'm one of the things that I worked with a professor and worked in one of his econ classes and talked to those students. And what I realized while I was putting that presentation together, that over the years, I have worked for big business my whole life. I raised barley for Coors, and you were under that thumb. And one day they came to us, and whether you filled out a contract or not, they dictated what the price was and whether they take the product. Same thing with Budweiser. We had the same thing with sugar beets. We worked through Great Western Sugar Company. They went through a bankruptcy, and one year we didn't get paid for anything we did that year. And so I'm looking at that and I'm like, this is just wrong. We're working for the big companies, and they dictate how we're doing things. And also those same companies you need to put this chemical on, you need to put this type of seed in. And I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. It's all starting to come to fruition to me. And that's when I decided that, well, if we're going to do this farming thing, we need to sell direct to the consumer, and we need to educate so that people have the opportunity to learn where their food is coming from, because most people they have no clue.
I love this space for anyone who's listening in their position of leadership. If they are an entrepreneur, that space of, we are making a change and now we're going to educate why we made this change, because there can be so much more revenue that comes in when there is an understanding. And I so appreciate that. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We will be right back. Glass Arts Collective is doing something so fun and amazing. Believing that all of us are creative, they are opening up their Instagram page for people who are creating things to be able to post those things there. I also believe that you are creative, and I'm super excited about this opportunity to be supporting Glass Arts Collective. They are amazing. So happy to have this conversation with Larry. I love that he is a farmer, that somebody who is working the land, that is so connected in with the seasons. Also, somebody who has said there can be a different way of doing what we have traditionally been doing. And so, in that space, Larry, tell us a little bit more about this excitement that you have about going directly to the consumer.
Well, that was kind of the mainstay of what we were doing when we started bringing the cattle back into the regenerative ag process.
Mhm.
Is rather than just selling to corporate America, if I'm going through the effort to try and improve the soil and the plants and everything else and these animals, I don't want them just to be blended in.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a specialty, um, more like a unicorn than a specialty, is that it's just so unique. And I guess what has really motivated me with this is that rather than the typical farmer way of um producing a crop, selling it wholesale and buying everything retail,
Mhm.
now I have the opportunity to sit down and figure out exactly what it costs us to produce something. And then I can generate my prices based on that instead of trying to pigeonhole everything together and at the end of the year you come up with 50 cents short and you're like, oh man, now we have this opportunity to get ourselves in a position where it's sustainable, where I feel better that I can be here next year, that I'll
Nice.
be able to continue.
Yes.
And so that's been kind of eye-opening as well, kind of a revelation. And so I'm pleased with that. I mean, farmers over the years have had really good years, and then there's just streaks of really bad times. Whether that be the drought or
Mhm.
um, um, the depression, whatever the case is. There's always some outside influence.
Mhm.
This is kind of a means for an insulation to a degree,
Mhm.
so that we can try and educate people, educate our consumers on what it really takes to produce the
Mhm.
food that they're eating. And then not only that, show them that the food that we're making is different. And a lot of people will go to the store and they'll say, oh, gee, the organic is great. We know that that's the thing we need to do. There's no chemicals or whatever. Well,
Mhm.
unfortunately, we're finding that a lot of the organics are not able to put that microbiological activity back into the soil, and they're having to till the ground a lot more
Mhm.
than they normally would to try and keep away from the weeds. Well, what I'm trying to figure out is how I can incorporate those weeds or find other crops that suppress them.
Mhm.
And so, the six tenets of the regenerative ag process is one of the main ones is to always keep a root in the ground. So we won't have that soil blowing around. We won't have that static electricity that's happening. And we
Mhm.
try and keep that carbon flowing back in. And
Mhm.
it's all ultra important for people to understand that, to get that feeling that even if you look at your own yard and you see dandelions in your yard and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go get the 2,4-D. We got to get rid of that. Well, there's a reason that dandelion came in. And it's because the calcium is tied up into that soil. And so the dandelion is reaching out, trying to move that calcium so they can be utilized.
Mhm.
So by us going out there and wanting that pristine monocrop,
Right.
we have to learn to accept that weeds are part of the system.
Yeah.
And the one thing that there's been some studies done, and you see cattle out on the ranges, a lot of it, we're putting the cattle into situations where, again, it's in a monocrop. They only get one thing to choose from. Well, if I have weeds in my fields, if I plant 6, 7, 8 different species, then it's like the cow gets to have the salad bar.
Right.
They get to choose what they need to eat, what tastes good to them today. and they don't eat the same thing day after day after day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, you know, I keep learning something new every day. And, lots of times I wish I was 20 something so I know today what I know and could put it in place at that time. But,
Mm.
time is compressed for me, but I'm excited to move forward.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self if you could go back and redo it? What would you say about looking at how everyone else around is doing it and then taking the knowledge that you have, the training that you have, the experience now that you have with what you are doing? What would you say to that 20-year-old self?
Don't believe what they're teaching you.
Mm.
What we've discovered over time is that a lot of the universities that are doing the research, they're getting paid by these companies, and because of that pay, they're restricted on what they can say and what they can show.
Right.
Big business is dictating what they need to move forward. And so a lot of the information that I was taught is pretty much bogus.
Mm.
And so we've got to relearn everything. Now, I can't say that all of it is bad,
Right.
but you need to take a look at it in the right lens and be able to filter
Mhm.
what was wrong and what was right. And so if I'd have known that early on, and I got to be honest that it hasn't been that long ago that I was told by a person out in the field with Monsanto that Roundup was the safest chemical ever created.
Mm.
And that's, 10, 15 years ago. And
Yeah.
they knew better. But, we just follow along because that's what they tell us. I mean, you go in and you talk to your seed guy and now, well, this is the latest and the greatest. And you look at the results, the test plots that they've done, and you go, yeah, that's good. Then you go to the chemical guy and it's like, oh, well, yeah, this is what you're going to need to do that to get to these yields. And then the banker on top of it is going, well, you're going to have to maximize
Mhm.
because we're a little bit behind here. We got to catch up. And so it's just a vicious circle. And when you finally get to the point of, I can't take this, the
Mhm.
stress is too much,
Yeah.
then you start the realization of, wait a minute, what are we doing? And that a point that I do want to bring up is that it's not well known, but the suicide rate amongst farmers is pretty high.
It is.
It's probably one of the highest percentages of any of the occupations, but because the number of farmers are so small now in comparison,
Mm.
that it doesn't really raise the blimp anymore.
Right.
But I don't want to dwell on that
Mhm.
because for me, I don't have those feelings. I don't have that pressure on me.
Mm.
Of course, we got to move product. We raise product. We got to get it sold. But
Right.
I I just want to help people. I want to help them understand, cut through the noise. I mean, consumers are very conflicted. I mean, you go to the grocery store and you look into the meat counter and it says organic, it says regenerative, it says grass fed. And there's so many different labels. The fact of the matter is that a lot of our meat products that are available to the consumer are actually foreign
Mhm.
products. All they have to do is either cut it or repackage it, and they can put a label on it that says product of USA.
Yeah.
And so if you do not know where your food is coming from, you
Mm.
have no clue what you're ingesting. And people are struggling all the time. Do I do the carnivore diet? Do I do keto? Do I even diet? And this is the time of year that people are, oh, we got to do our New Year's resolutions. We got to move forward with those kinds of things. It's a
Mm.
renewal, and yet
Mm.
when it comes down to it, they don't see the results and they don't have the product they need to get the result.
Mm. So if someone were to go to your website, the losriosfarm.com website, what would they find there?
Well, you wouldn't find all of my products because we definitely have a lot more that the website doesn't show. But what the concentration is the beef and the pork that we raise. We have grass-fed beef, grass-finished beef, also pasture pork, and you can either buy in bulk or in packages in bundles. Depending on what your freezer size is, what you're comfortable with, what your budget is, that kind of thing. We try and work with everybody, but understand that the beef and the pork are just a small portion of what we do here on the farm, but that is what's featured in the website.
And then you're also shipping, I'm guessing, in America.
Yes.
Lovely. And for people who are living close in Colorado, then what is their access into your high tunnel tomatoes and the lettuces that you're doing and all the other vegetables that you grow in the summertime?
Well, kind of an interesting story that went along with that. I put up a high tunnel and started growing tomatoes, and that was right when COVID started. And I had talked with all these restaurants, and everybody was excited. Oh gosh, yeah, you're going to have heritage tomatoes that are grown in the ground, and oh my gosh, this sounds really great. Well, then they all shut down, and I've got 350 tomato plants out there. Now what do I do? And so we started a farm stand, and it was a no contact thing. I would just go out and I'd put some product out in a little box. It was definitely Beverly Hillbillies looking. There was no doubt about that. But it was a self-serve and trust everybody, take what you want, pay what you feel you need to pay. And we've progressed a little bit from that. We're trying to improve our image on that regard, but it was a fast pivot that we had to do. And I, working by myself on this kind of thing, that was the best I could do at the time. And of course, we didn't know with COVID, we didn't want to have a lot of talking with people, but now we're in a situation that if people want to come out and learn, I've not gotten to the point yet where I can offer classes or tours for large groups, that kind of thing, but I more than welcome to share what we have. Our government officials aren't very happy with that kind of thing, either the insurance companies, but we're trying to work around those kinds of things. But my main thing is I want people to understand where their food comes from.
Yes.
And if that means that you want to come and work a few hours a week or whatever the case, we're open to those kinds of things. We'll help you out any way we can. And, open ideas. Community is really, really important when it comes to agriculture and food. One of the things that I learned a long time ago, actually, it was a priest that I had heard at a wedding was talking about growing and traveling. And he says the one thing that people always asked him when he would go somewhere and come back is, how was the food? Mm. And whenever people go on vacation, that's one of the things they look for is, hey, we want a unique situation. Well, this gives me an opportunity to help you on a local basis, what your day-to-day is, what your food experience is.
Mm. I know that you were involved in the Colorado STAR program, the Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources. What would those resources be that you talk about inside of that particular group?
Well, they've changed that. I'm not exactly sure. It's now the Soil Health Initiative.
Oh, okay.
But basically what we did was there was a program that was started in Indiana or Illinois. Mm-hmm. And we worked a few years ago to try and replicate that and then make it fit more to rangeland and ranchers and dry land and all the different aspects in the agriculture in Colorado. And so what we tried to set it on was for every regenerative ag tenant that you applied to your farm,
Mhm.
then you would be rewarded with a star rating on that. And so the first year the program came out, we had a possibility of 5 stars, and I was awarded 4 out of the 5.
So good.
So yeah, I was really proud of that, and so we're trying to improve that. The biology, adding the tea back into the soil, that's going to help. And then the next step that I really want to learn some more about, because being on the river where we have all of these trees and we have a lot of dead limbs and that kind of thing, instead of just burning them up, I want to try and make biochar out of that
Mhm.
and use that as a feed, a bedding, and also a soil treatment.
Beautiful. When we moved to this property, we created raised beds and then did more of a hugelkultur where we put in the old logs. So there's an area that we call the Woody Glen on the property, and took some dead trees out of there. Across the street was a neighbor who had a tree that's dead at this point, and so limbs are coming down. And so we asked, hey, can we have some of that as well? And so we filled up the base of the beds then with all of that. And then we had massive rainstorms. So that brought in not just leaves from our place, but leaves from, I want to say, at least half a mile up. It came down in the swale area, and the natural swale. And so we spent a day and a half or so gathering up all the leaves and sticking that in the beds as well, and then got soil and put that in there. I will confess that after the okra were done in the raised beds, I originally just cut them back and then to see if they would come back. And they weren't doing that. We had some hard freezes. And so I did go out and take them out, the roots out. And I think next year I will leave those in. I took them out because I was trying to make sure I was getting all of the roots of the Bermuda grass that had gotten into them as well. And so I don't mind having things out of order in the beds, but I really am not a fan of the Bermuda grass growing in that particular area. And so by pulling out the okra roots, then I was also able to get the rest of the roots out. But I do hear what you are saying about leave the roots in, no matter what kind of gardening you're doing. Cut across the top, take the rest of it, put it in the compost. If you need to put it in the burn pile, so be it. And then when you make your tea, what are you making your teas out of? Are you taking what you've cut, like in the tomatoes? Are you taking the tomatoes, what you've cut there, to make the teas? Or what? How do you do that?
Well, I kind of short circuit the process a little bit, is that I have access to several different compost makers. And so I'm just taking compost from some of the tested producers. I don't have enough time to make my own compost yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully in time that will be another step that I can try and control that. But I start with about 40 pounds of compost that probably has some worms in it, but definitely worm castings.
Yes.
We put that into a net, and then we add fungus from a mushroom farm. We're adding humic acid, natural humic acid that we get from waste products from the fruit farms. We're putting in seaweed and some type of kelp. And then this next year, we're going to, based on our soil samples, we're going to start adding some calcium, some sugars, just different things to try and speed that up. The other thing is that it was kind of haphazard and happen chance to try and put it out, but we were just using traditional sprayers to apply it. And we're finding that by putting the biome into a high pressure system, that we're probably killing a lot of it. Even though there is some live that go through, we wanted a higher percentage of the live, so that when it hit the plants and the soil, it's a lot more active, not just like applying manure.
Right.
And so our pumping systems right now, what I'm trying to go through is figure out how to put on pumps and our tank systems to put that on the planters, so that when we go out and we plant, I can have that go into the soil. We'll also be able to put it on with sprayers. And we're only using about 20 to 40 PSI.
Right.
And so we're trying to keep our pressures down, but we're trying to get that live biome as active as we can into the soil so that it can move out and go to work immediately.
And I love how you spoke earlier about how we have such a common conversation about gut health, and are you taking prebiotics or probiotics, and are you eating yogurt, are you doing kefir, all those different kinds of things, pickled things as well, and that you were able to help that conversation move from a conversation that many people will have to one about how important it is for the soil to have all of those things as well. Because if the soil is healthy, then not only what is growing in it is going to be healthier, it's also going to bring more nutrients. You can't take nothing, soil that's been completely depleted, and have food that comes out of that as being what people would have eaten 200 years ago on the same plot of land. And so that space of doing the teas and regenerating the land and then sequestering all of this carbon, how incredible is that? If we aren't tilling, that we are actually giving nature the opportunity to pull the carbon back in like it knows to do and pull that back into the ground. And we're happy to have it in the ground for lots of different reasons, but how good that is for all the different things. So I really appreciate how you take everyday conversations and are able to move that into the space of what's taking place in farming as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's ultra important to know what the benefits of carbon are. Now, we've been told for years that they're cutting down the forests in Brazil, and that's changing our environment. We've been really bad, and it's not just farmers; it's everybody in particular. Every time you put a chemical on your own garden or your lawn, keep in mind that the world population now is approximately 8 billion people. Well, what we know today, the research that we have today, is that you take a cubic foot of soil, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, there's approximately 8 billion living creatures in that soil. So every time you put in a chemical, if it's something that you have to wear a mask or protective clothing, you're putting that on 8 billion tiny little animals that can't protect themselves. So, what's the point? And, you brought up the thing about your raised beds or you putting the leaves on. Let's look at the forests where the leaves are always there all winter, but they seem to disappear. Well, we're losing a lot of our bees and our pollinators because everybody, again, wants that pristine lawn. And so they're cleaning all their beds out to the ground and they're pulling all those leaves off. And so we're taking all that protection away from all those animals that truly need us. And, I had a conversation with somebody the other day that they were saying that they were like, oh, well, during COVID, it was ivermectin that really got me through. Well, we won't use ivermectin on any of our animals because what we found is it's a dewormer. Okay, so we're killing the worms, but it's also like taking an antibiotic. So it kills everything within the animal. And so when that animal goes and makes the cow patty out there, we weren't having any dung beetles. We weren't having any. The manure was staying intact. It wasn't moving around, and so ivermectin was one of the first things that we eliminated. And the other thing is that we don't pasture as close to the ground as we used to, so we don't have the worm pressure that they have.
Yes.
So it's a common sense sort of a thing. Basically what we're trying to do is emulate what we had in that prairie when the American bison were running wild out here.
Right.
And so you try and bring it. It's all for full circle, and it's all common sense. It's just that it's been taught out of us, and we just need to relearn it.
So, Larry, you were talking about one of the current pressures that you have is the watering piece. If there's a year of drought, if you have a couple years put together, how does regenerative farming, with keeping the roots in the soil, how does that help retain rainwater, no runoff?
That's one of the toughest and hardest questions to deal with when it comes to converting farmers into regenerative agriculture. Because for us, we were taught in the 50s, particularly in eastern Colorado, Kansas, to do the strip till, where you only raised one monocrop every other year, and you would fallow that field during the summer and into the next year. Well, you can't hardly walk on those fields in the middle of summer.
So hot.
It is. And so when you have that kind of heat out there, you're driving those microorganisms deeper into the ground, and it's causing that ground to eradicate from the sun, and it becomes a lot more volatile. And so we're having a lot more dissipation of the soil out there. And so by having a cover crop, by having a crop growing there, it will take some of the moisture, but on the other side of it, you'll bring that soil temperature from 110 or 115 degrees down to 60 degrees. Now you have all those microbes coming up to the surface. They're working on the roots. They're bringing that carbon down into the ground. They're making that organic matter, which is basically carbon.
Right.
And now you're cooling the soil, and you're using a percentage of that water for plant production, but on the other side of it, it's preserving a lot more.
Yes.
And so it's a hard thing to fathom that you want to plant crops that are very thick, that it's going to save water. It's not intuitive to believe in that, but that's what we're seeing.
What are the cover crops that you are enjoying that also are good for the bee population or the pollinators?
Oh, buckwheat. Buckwheat by far is the most crazy thing in the world. I do have some beehives, and we do have some honey, and it's buckwheat honey. The bees love the buckwheat.
Yes.
And it only flowers for a short period of time, but you can't even walk into that field. It just buzzes. Now the bees wouldn't bother you,
right?
But it's like, oh my gosh, and it's just this thick hum all over the ground, and I just love the buckwheat.
Are you using the buckwheat that would have grown there 100, 200 years ago, or are you using something that is going to be a fast grower in that particular area?
We try and use as many heritage crops as we can. I have been growing a red 5 wheat, a hard winter wheat that came from Russia, Ukraine area. Another one, oh golly, the name escapes me right now. That makes me mad. But what we're trying to use a lot more heritage crops. When it comes to buckwheat, I've not researched that one, but a lot of them originated out of Japan.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Buckwheat was not I guess you would call it an invasive plant here. It's not native to the United States, but we're the same climate here in Colorado as they are in a lot of Japan. So Kodo variety is one that I've planted, and they're all named after Japanese people.
The reason I ask is because there's a place in California called the California Botanic Gardens. It used to be called Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Gardens. And I was walking by, and the same buzz, right? The zzz, and so I had to stop to see what they were working on. And they were working on a native species of buckwheat. And I was just so amazed by that because it looked nothing like what I thought it should look like. But boy, the bees were just dancing. They were so pleased to have their buckwheat. So I'm just so glad to hear that you are planting it and that they are enjoying that as well. Describe what the honey tastes like, buckwheat honey.
It appearances, it's a little bit darker,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more pungent. It
Mm-hmm.
it 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 will taste and smell a little bit earthy, kind of like soil.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit different, but then again, they do say that whatever area you live in, you should be buying honey to that local area so that it help you with your immune system.
Yes.
Well, that's obviously the same thing when it comes to the buckwheat honey, is that um, try and keep it localized so that that product, it brings those nutrients
Mm-hmm.
to your body, just like those bees are bringing it out of that buckwheat and putting it into that honey.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. You've also done some work with CSU, Colorado State University. What has that work looked like? Have you felt like it's been beneficial for the next generations and that they have heard what you've had to say? How is that working between universities that let's take the big pharma, the big money off the table in this part of the conversation in terms of uh, having professors and people who are looking for how can we not just save our soil, but we need to be saving our water. The runoff of whatever chemicals are put onto the soil are finding their ways also into our waterways. And so by taking care of the soil, by saving the soil, by regenerating, we are not only keeping it from blowing away, or we're also keeping the chemicals out of the waterways as well. So in your conversations with Colorado State University and the people who are there, what are you finding that's helpful for the next generation?
Well, we did a study of taking that runoff water, and we put it into a grassy field. And it's the process that we've been using for years and years and years. But amazingly, it had never been studied or tested to what level that grassed area was filtering uh, not only soil, but nutrients and also chemicals.
Mm.
Um, there's been lots of pushback over the years. We have water engineers that work for the state that come around here and regulate our ditches and that kind of thing. And they were always giving me grief that, oh, you can't use that tailwater. You can't use that wastewater. You've got to put it back in the river. I said, oh, I'm cleaning it up for you. And so I wanted to have the ability to test that. And believe it or not, within the state of Colorado, no one had ever tested what.
Really?
Yeah, there was a few tests that were back east and on the
Mhm.
west coast and down in the south, but nothing had been done in Colorado. And so we took the opportunity, a 4-year study, where we measured the water that was coming onto this small field as the wastewater. As my farm being on the river bottom, I get about 5 square miles of water from other areas that come here. And
Sure.
so we funneled that down into an area where we could test. They were taking samples of that water every 20 minutes. And as it goes through the ditch, then we were putting it into just an irrigation ditch, and we were just running it over this grassy area, a very small grassy area, but the water was flowing slowly.
Sure.
And so we were removing a little better than 90% of the soil residue out of that water. And we were taking that water that looked like either the most chocolate milk you would ever see or the craziest Starbucks coffee you'd ever seen.
Yes.
We were taking that kind of a water and we were getting it clear enough where, and of course it wasn't 100% by any means, but
Right.
it was much cleaner than if we were just dumping it straight into the river.
Of
And
course.
and so we were at the time we were studying nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and soil solids. And then we started messing around with the E. coli, and we couldn't figure that one out because that one was bouncing all over the place. And uh, by the end of the 4-year study, we did hit a drought. We didn't get a lot of results that 4th year, but we also didn't get an opportunity to expand to go into what was, a lot of the microbial activity.
Right.
That was a whole nother area of study that we needed to go into, that we were, we were just dangerous enough to figure out what we were doing, but we had no clue what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. To be able to take the runoff, to be able to have 90% of the solids, the soils, to stay on land, and then to have the rest of it seep back in and be so much cleaner, so much more usable. What did you guys notice also, like on the nitrogen? Was the soil retaining the nitrogen, or were you seeing a pretty big flow through with that?
Yeah, understand that this is pretty sandy because it's next
Right.
to the river bottom. So it was percolating a lot into the ground, and so we weren't able to get a lot of the chemical analysis, but we were watching the water levels at. Trying to think back, it was like a foot, 2 feet, and 6 foot deep,
Mm-hmm.
and so that water was percolating down into that ground, and there was a high percentage that was going in, and this is only a couple of feet in elevation above the river water, but it was like 100 feet away from the water's edge.
Sure.
So it's pretty slow slope in there, and we were running the water really slowly. So we were able to put a lot of that stuff in. The one thing that we had found with the drought was that there were a lot of salt levels that were starting to come up, and I was
Yes.
retaining that.
Yes.
So with that filter strip, I've had to go back and replant a couple of times because
Mhm.
it's changed the dynamics of that soil, and a lot of the plants that we had planted there just weren't tolerant. Number one, to the amount of water they were getting, and number two, to the level of nutrients and soil and salts.
Sure. So it was cleaning the water, but it was also changing the land and what was going to be able to grow there.
Right.
And yeah, I can so appreciate that. When we moved onto this property, we have huge black walnut trees that my grandparents had planted uh, in the early 70s. And so we just wanted to make sure that the health of the trees were good. We just wanted to have, so we had an arborist come and walk the land, and learned so much from him about so many different things about trees and about how trees, the limbs have a sail to them. So if you happen to cut one off, there's a really good chance that the tree is now unbalanced when the wind comes through, and it damages the trees so much more. We learned so much more. But he also then was talking to us about the pasture land, which is what this area used to be, that has been gardened, but still it's not a monocrop of anything. It's such a collection of weeds, but he was able to say and talk about so many of them were. And so many of them, we live in the most biodiverse area in the entire globe, the Smoky Mountains. And so with that then, and just talked about, how good it was that we weren't spraying anything, that we weren't doing any of those kinds of things to it. And true, it's not a pristine green whatever, but it feels good knowing that we are giving every single insect the best chance that they can have of their best life. And that's just something that personally feels good when I look outside.
Well, first of all, you make me highly envious that you have black walnut trees. I can't. I wish I could grow a lot of oaks and black walnuts, but fact of the matter was, it was 20 below this morning. So,
Right.
and,
Right.
and it'll probably be 30 degrees by the end of the day. So that black walnuts don't like that.
No, that's too big of a swing for them.
Right. But it makes a wonderful difference just how when you get a diversification of species, how everything just seems to function better. And I guess a good anecdote that was shared with me was there was somebody with the Audubon Society,
Mhm.
and I'll just leave it at that because I can't remember which branch or whatever, but they were able to go with a rancher onto a field in southeast Colorado where it was definitely dry, horrible humidity. It's just a barren It's a very tough place for anything to grow. And this ornithologist went out there with them, and he just stopped and listened. And he goes, I don't need to go any further. He says, you've got like 20 or 30 different bird species that you didn't used to have. They said, well, you've only been here 5 minutes. How do you know that? He says, listen, you can hear them.
Yes. Yeah. A friend of mine went to a regenerative pitted fruit. So it would be plums and peaches and those kinds of things in California. And everything he does is regenerative. And across this road, then the person there is growing the same kinds of things, but they are traditional, conventional. On the other side, she said you could not hear an insect at all. And she said as soon as it got to be late afternoon, that the crickets would begin on the regenerative side. And she said that was for her that space of saying, oh, I understand now what it means to have a biodiverse space, because the insects can grow, they can do their thing. And that for me was just such oh yeah, when I do go to Hawaii, when I do visit Africa in certain areas, those are the things that you notice at night. Is it's so loud I can hardly sleep. Well, it's because you're in a beautiful space. In this beautiful space, Larry, are there things that you would like to reiterate for us to just really hold on to as we think back on Los Rios Farm and the work that you were doing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the list is long, but I guess the main thing is just to learn what the agriculture is wherever you live. I usually end a lot of my presentations with learn who your local farmers are, get to know those local farmers, support those local farmers, buy local. And you will be surprised how much better you feel, not only with your health, but also what you're doing for the community and how you're keeping your dollars local. It's not going to some national chain or whatever the case is. But not only that, you're building community. You're starting conversation with people that don't normally interact. And you're not going to find farmers just walking down the street. You're going to have to get
that.
Yeah, you're going to have to get some turning oil and turn into their driveway. Now, you might get some strange looks, but a lot of people now, a lot of the farmers have CSAs, or, they're selling their stuff at stands or whatever the case. Just get to know them and start a conversation. Don't, I have so many people that go, oh, your cows make so much noise, or they're causing this, or they're doing that. And I'm like, do you know why? Yeah. And they don't. They have no clue what the noise is. It's an aggravation. Well, if you're going to live out in the country, you need to appreciate what's truly going on out there and understand. And so take the time. We live in a society that is so busy, and our technology is just driving us crazy. We have less and less time all the time. And so just build community. We don't have community like we used to. A lot of rural America has disappeared, and it's schools, it's bowling alleys, it's volunteer firemen. You need to get involved in your community and not be afraid to share and understand, and you will learn so much about the world you live in.
So well said. Larry, thank you so much for coming on Simply Sarah and sharing your wisdom. And I'm so excited to hear in the future also about how this regenerative farming continues to just spark beautiful things in your life.
Well, not just my life, but thank you, Sarah. It's a good growing trend. I hope it continues, and we need everybody's help. So, but thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of your broadcast system.
Absolutely. And we say thank you so much to you, our audience, for listening and considering what it could look like for you to be shopping at a farmer's stand or going to a Saturday farmer's market, perhaps. finding a space where you can be having conversations with the people who are actually growing your food and finding out what practices they are using and finding out if that's the best for you. So grateful that you are here. Take good care of you.